Whispers in the Sand, a true desert horror story. Introduction. In the summer of 2013, a 34-year-old man named Eric Lambert set out on a solo road trip through the American Southwest. Eric, an avid photographer and nature lover, had one goal in mind: to capture the untouched beauty of the Mojave Desert during sunrise. He had read that the colors of the desert at dawn were unlike anything else, and he didn't want to miss the opportunity. What Eric didn't know was that his camera would capture more than just scenery. It would document the most terrifying experience of his life. The journey begins. Eric arrived at a remote desert outpost late in the afternoon. It was a small, nearly abandoned town with a population of maybe a dozen people. He checked into a tiny motel run by an old man who barely spoke. When Eric told him he was heading into the dunes alone the next morning, the man looked up, stared at him for a few seconds, and simply said, "Don't go past the third ridge." Eric laughed it off, thinking the man was just being overly cautious. Into the desert. At 4:30 a.m., Eric packed his gear and drove into the Mojave. He parked near an unmarked trail, slung his camera bag over his shoulder, and started walking east into the dunes. The sky was just beginning to lighten, casting eerie shadows across the sand. Everything was silent except for the crunch of his boots and the occasional gust of wind. By 6 a.m., Eric had passed several ridges and was deep into the desert. He set up his tripod and began shooting. That's when he noticed something strange in the distance. A figure. It looked like a person walking slowly through the dunes. Eric zoomed in with his camera, but the figure was blurry and oddly distorted. He called out, thinking it might be another hiker, but the figure didn't respond. It just kept walking, not toward him, but around him, as if circling. The first sign. Suddenly Eric felt his skin crawl. The wind had stopped. The air was unnaturally still. He turned around and saw footprints. Not his own. Fresh footprints leading right up behind where he was standing. There was no one there. He spun in circles, searching the horizon. The figure he'd seen was now gone. Eric packed up in a panic and started heading back, but every ridge he crossed looked unfamiliar. The sun was fully up now, but it felt like the desert was getting darker. The whispers begin. As he tried to retrace his steps, he began hearing faint whispers, so soft they almost blended with the wind. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but then the whispers grew louder. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language he recognized. He pulled out his phone. No service. Then he noticed something that made his heart sink. There were no more footprints. Not his, not anyone's. The sand was completely smooth. The entity Eric broke into a run. That's when he saw it. A tall, thin shape standing perfectly still at the top of a nearby dune. No face, no clothes, just a silhouette darker than anything around it. He blinked and it was gone. He kept running, drenched in sweat and nearly delirious. Time felt like it had slowed down. At one point he tripped and rolled down a dune. When he looked up, he was back where he had started that morning. His car parked in the distance. But something was wrong. The return. When Eric reached the car, the windows were fogged up from the inside. His watch said it was 10:15 a.m., but his phone said 5:48 p.m. Nearly 10 hours had passed. He drove straight back to the motel, pale and shaking. The old man at the desk looked up and said quietly, "You went past the third ridge, didn't you?" Eric could barely nod. The man said nothing more. Aftermath: Eric never spoke of the experience again, except to post a single blurred photo online months later. An image of the dunes with what looked like a shadowy figure standing far off in the background. It caused a stir in online forums, with some saying it was edited, others swearing it was real. But Eric deleted his account shortly afterward and disappeared from the internet completely. To this day, hikers in the Mojave still report whispers, strange shadows, and the feeling of being watched, especially if they go past the third ridge. Some say it's just the desert playing tricks on the mind. Others say something ancient still lives beneath the sand. End of the path in the heart of the desert, a true terrifying tale from the Nevada desert. Introduction. In 2005, a man named Adam Jones from California traveled to the Nevada desert for a research project. Adam's goal was to study the rare plants of the area, specifically those in a remote region of the desert. He had been on similar nature trips before and never feared the harsh conditions of desert environments. However, during this trip, something happened that changed his life forever. The beginning of the journey. Adam set off on a summer day toward the Nevada desert. He had a four-wheel drive vehicle and all the necessary equipment for camping. His aim was to stay a few days in a remote area and conduct his studies. At first, the roads were smooth and dusty, but as he ventured deeper into the region, the roads became increasingly difficult to navigate. The first few days were uneventful. Adam spent his days researching plants and his nights camping under the vast desert sky. The sound of the wind and the silence of the desert gave him a sense of peace, but it also made him feel a little uneasy at times. The first signs. On the fourth day of his trip, something strange occurred. Adam was examining a rare plant when he suddenly felt something moving around him. At first, he thought it was just the wind, or perhaps an animal passing by. But as he continued his research, the sound seemed to follow him, footsteps in sync with his own. Adam paused and listened. The footsteps stopped. He turned around and saw nothing. He thought to himself, "It's just my imagination. Maybe it was just an animal." But as he resumed his work, the footsteps returned, louder this time. Someone or something was walking behind him. A night of terror. That night, Adam decided to pack up and move to a different spot, further from where he had been. He wasn't sure why, but something about the area felt wrong. He gathered his things and headed north, finding a new location to set up his camp. After several hours of driving through the desert, he stopped in a wide, empty area. He felt a sense of calm, though it was still unsettlingly quiet. As he began setting up his tent, he noticed a faint light in the distance. It was a vehicle, a car moving slowly toward him. Adam, feeling anxious, decided to stay inside his tent and watch. The car approached, but no one exited. The lights of the vehicle were on, but it remained completely still. The engine turned off and the silence was deafening. Adam cautiously stepped outside and approached the vehicle, only to find that the doors were locked. Just as he reached for the door handle, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. The emergence of the unknown. Adam turned around, and what he saw would haunt him forever. In the darkness of the desert, several humanoid figures were emerging from behind a small hill. They were tall and thin, with strange, featureless faces. Their eyes glowed eerily in the darkness, but the rest of their bodies seemed unnatural and stiff. They stood there, motionless, staring at Adam. Panicking, Adam turned and ran as fast as he could. The footsteps behind him grew louder with every step. Although he was familiar with the terrain, his fear clouded his judgment, and he ended up running into a side path he had never taken before. Everything around him became darker. The trees and shrubs closed in around him, as if the desert itself was swallowing him up. He stopped again, heart racing. There was no sound. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the same figures from before, now standing only a few meters away. It was as though they had materialized out of thin air. The final escape. With whatever strength he had left, Adam sprinted toward his vehicle. His phone was dying, but he managed to turn on the flashlight. After what felt like an eternity, he saw the faint glow of the parking lot lights in the distance. He reached the entrance of the park, breathless and tearful, and told the park ranger that he had been chased by something. When the police arrived and searched the area, they found nothing, but the truth was even more chilling. A few days later, a park employee admitted that several others had reported similar experiences in the past. Some claimed that a silent man with a strange face had followed them in the desert. However, no physical evidence was ever found. Adam never returned to the desert. Whenever someone mentioned the Nevada desert, he would just look down, a bitter smile on his face. Some paths, even though beautiful, are not meant to be walked.